Hello and welcome to the Sci 333 mini lecture for Week 5, Disaster Preparedness, Risk Assessment, Emergency Planning, Unit 2, Psychology of Disaster, Response and Preparedness. Now, a quick note, this week brings us to a close of our first two units on the psychology of disaster. Next week, we'll continue to build on what we've learned so far, but switch our focus to climate change. So in the past few weeks, we've learned a lot about the logistics of disasters and of disaster preparedness, response, and recovery. We've talked about some societal issues, and we've talked about the psychology of disasters in all of its many forms. This week, we're synthesizing all of this and bringing the unit to a close. We're going to look at practical preparedness actions that can be taken by lay individuals, disaster management professionals, and societies as a whole. For these readings, I want you to put yourself in the place of disaster managers. You yourself, actually, in whatever field it is that you intend to be going into, what is your place now, knowing what you know about psychology of disasters, about the intricate structures of societies dealing with disasters. These readings are about our steps forward, so put yourself into that place thinking about what are these steps that you can take forward. There are two chapters in the Disasters by Design book. Chapter 8, Innovative Paths and New Directions, talks about the technologies and steps forward that we've taken in terms of risk analysis and research. I find this chapter to be very heartening, actually. If you find yourself thinking, oh wow, we have so far to go, do a quick Google search of any disaster that happened before 1900. Globally, we have come a long way, and this chapter kind of goes into some of those new technologies. Next in Chapter 9, of Disasters by Design, getting from here to there, and here we begin to consider the fact that while we as a species have access to a lot of technology and a lot of knowledge, individual communities may or may not have access to those things. And even places that are very good at disaster preparedness and response have to stay on top of it in order to maintain their preparedness. They can always improve. Now, this is the final chapter of the book, and so it offers a lot of kind of summary commentary on how, and again, put yourself into this how we can prepare, can move forward and make our communities and our societies better prepared for disasters. And I'll give you a quick spoiler. There's a lot of doing. We have to do it. We need to communicate with each other and develop networks to share information. We need to develop policies. We need to assess best practices, and we need to do cost-benefit analyses. Unfortunately, there's oftentimes a difference between what we should do and what we can do. But the ultimate goal is that we always do as much as possible in order to protect lives. Next, we have an article from Perry and Lindell, who we're familiar with from our previous readings. This is Preparedness for Emergency Response, Guidelines for Emergency Planning Process. The nutshell version of this article is something that will be obvious to you now after these past few weeks in this class. There's a difference between having a written plan and planning for an emergency. So here in this article, Perry and Lindell provide research and evidence-based guidance for planning for disasters. This article is a tremendous resource, and I do suggest, especially for those of you that are going into explicitly disaster-related fields, set this article aside for future reference. I learn a lot from it every time I read it. Finally, I have two disaster handbooks that I wrote. There's a third one that is in Samoan that I did not require you to read since it's in Samoan. There are a few things that I want to share with you about this project. First of all, in terms of the reading, you'll notice that most of the information from both books is the same from one book to the other. Most of it is only very slightly targeted for relevance from Maui to American Samoa, and a lot of the information is generally useful in both places and in other places as well. Next, you will see the survey results that are listed in both of the books. This is the survey that I conducted in Maui and American Samoa previously, and that we as a class have been updating for to be used and to be useful in Maine. So these are the results books from that study. A bit of background on this research. I was awarded the American Psychological Foundation Visionary Grant, which funded this research. I'm a climate change researcher, but a lot of times we think about and deal with climate change in the short term with these discrete disaster events. And we know in the psychology of climate change that knowledge about climate change does not necessarily mean that people feel the risk from climate change and then act on it. We'll talk about this again later in the semester. And also, as you've learned already, after experiencing a disaster, even people who don't have PTSD still often experience higher rates of anxiety. I had also heard during previous research in Tuvalu and around the Pacific, people saying things like, well, if I didn't believe in climate change before this disaster experience, after experiencing that, I certainly do now. And I heard this enough times, and I've had colleagues hear this as well, that as a researcher, I thought, I have to measure this. And so what I'm looking at is this research, is this question. When people are recovering psychologically from a disaster, does it increase their activities toward future disaster preparedness? And does it have any influence on or interaction with their climate change risk perception and preparedness? So these handbooks were created after conducting the surveys, after conducting interviews, and after conducting the workshops, which you may choose to participate in the main workshops. These handbooks are meant to address preparedness needs based on what I learned during this research from those communities and for those communities. They're meant to be read and used by lay people, and they don't therefore include any of the theoretical research findings, which I haven't published yet, although I did present at a couple of conferences over the summer. Where you see a difference between the two books especially are in the disaster stories sections. Right after the survey results, so from Maui and also from American Samoa. In Maui, there was a lot of discussion about the slow disasters of drought and the compounding hazards that are associated with it, such as wildfire, but also even flooding and mudslides. Since the land is all dried out, it just washes away when the rain does come. There's also stories from tsunami warnings that occurred, but when the tsunamis arrived, they were very small waves, didn't actually cause very much damage, very minimal, no deaths. That sort of thing. And so in Maui, I was hearing a lot about these hazards, but within the personal experience of participants, there are no real large-scale disasters. There still could be in the future, and people were aware of this and wanted to be prepared for this, but the responses I was getting were very different from those that I was getting in American Samoa. In American Samoa, in 2009, and along with Western Samoa and Tonga, there was a tsunami that wiped out villages. And it happened so fast. The earthquakes that caused it were very close to the shore, and within 15-20 minutes the waves started hitting, and they were massive waves. They were washing away buildings, whole villages, pulling buses and people out into the water, out to sea. This happened during morning rush hour, so when people were on their way to work, kids were on their way to school or had just been dropped off at school. This was a devastating event to this country. Now, the difference between the stories in Maui and American Samoa were really heavily correlated with the differences between their preparedness actions that they would later take for future disasters. In Maui, you'll see these stories of like the tsunami evacuation in where nothing really happened. The waves were really small, there wasn't very much damage, and there was no follow-up emergency planning, no discussion of, okay, what can we do next if this happens again, but the waves are big. And that can still happen. And people are aware of this, but again, that follow-up action just didn't occur. In American Samoa, on the other hand, one woman told me a story about running up the side of the mountain away from the wave, and her feet got wet and she could hear people screaming behind her, and then they were gone. American Samoa has massively overhauled their emergency planning and response system. They have emergency sirens now. They did not have them before. There are multiple redundancies that are built into their system, their response system. At the time of the tsunami, the one system that they had for the emergency alert was offsite. It was in Hawaii, and it actually was down during the moment in which that event was happening. So the society as a whole has become much better prepared. They've put an awful lot of resources into ongoing planning and preparation, but individuals individually also told me about these preparedness actions that they've taken in their homes and their work for themselves, and individuals are much better prepared. And all of this is building on that personal experience that they've had. So going back to all that we've learned about disasters, about psychology, and about preparedness, and going back to you putting yourself into this role, for individuals and communities to actually take the steps in improving their disaster preparedness and response system, we either need to have strong advocates or we need to have experienced something truly terrible. And of course, even when we go that second route of learning from our past experiences, it is true that it's too late for those that we've already lost. History is littered with really terrible disasters, but it's not too late for future steps and future protections. And that brings us to today. That brings us to chapter 8 and 9 in Disasters by Design, looking at how far we have come. And it brings us to all of the actions that we have now, all of the preparedness and response systems that we have in place, and it brings us to you moving forward. For our class activity this week, some of you have already confirmed with your interviewee, the one person that you are definitely going to interview with, so you're done with that part. Those of you who offered 3 options earlier, find someone and confirm and make sure that that can move forward and that you are ready to go with this. I also want you to go ahead and write up your interview questions. Now you'll notice in the syllabus under your interview, I say I want you to develop a list of 4 to 6 good questions for that person about what they do, particularly as it might relate to what you're learning in this class. These interview questions, seriously, the sky is the limit. Talk about, ask about anything that you are interested in. There is no specific format for this. You are very welcome to ask about specific topics that you have learned in this class, but you do not have to. You can confine it to what they specifically do, any advice that they have for you if it's in a field that you're going into. Seriously, just use this person, ask them what they know about, and find out as much as you can for that. All of that being said, I do want you to have 4 to 6 good questions to walk in with. There's a big difference between going in and saying, "So, tell me what you know," which is awkward and will lead to long silences in which they don't know what to say, they don't know what you want from them, and it's weird. To having some good questions that they can respond to. Keep things open-ended, so don't ask yes or no questions, but ask questions that they can then launch into stories and details. And of course, if they don't launch into stories and details, you can either stay silent and watch them expectantly, and usually people will rush to fill in the space, or you can say prompts. Go on, please, tell me more. But to begin with, we do want to have some good questions to start with. So think about who this person is that you'll be interviewing and what it is that you want to know. Post those questions in the discussion forum and evaluate and critique and offer suggestions to others as well. It is very beneficial to have other people look at your questions and improve them. And again, you do not have to take any of their advice if you don't like their advice. Ultimately, this is up to you, and so you do your interview as you want to do it. So, as always, let me know if you have any questions, and I will hear from you soon.